Hello, and welcome to The Pool is Abstract, where we're currently rewatching and dissecting the revived series of Doctor Who, episode by episode. My name is Connor. That's a great start. And with me is the person I'd jump in front of a car for.
Aw, please don't. But Charlotte.
You introduced yourself so awkwardly.
What?
How did I stumble over my words and you came across more awkward?
Thanks.
Just before we say anything, I'm hoping the audio is going to be okay this time. We're switching the setup a little bit, so we're going to be recording on my computer instead of my laptop, and we're switching the microphone setup a little bit, so hopefully the audio doesn't sound too bad. Work in progress. If it does sound bad, it'll be better next time, I promise.
Yeah.
But today, we are covering Series 1, Episode 8. It's called Father's Day. Mm-hmm. It aired on May 14th, 2005. Written by Paul Cornell. Mm. And I guess before we talk about the episode in general, like in terms of the plot rundown and everything, I just kind of want to say I've always held this episode in high regard. Mm. But watching it this time, I think this might actually be my favourite so far.
After watching it this time, even though I love The Unquiet Dead, I think technically this is the strongest episode of this season.
You think? If
not, for the next couple of seasons.
Well, in my head, I had Dalek as like a better episode than this, but no. I don't. I think the only point that Dalek has over this is that there's a good like 5 minutes in here that's a little bit cringe.
Yeah.
Intentionally, not cringe in bad writing, but just kind of like hard to watch, where Dalek doesn't have anything like that. But I think but I think the emotional beats in this one are like, you know, a bit more poignant to me, at least.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about this episode?
No.
Kind of just in general?
No.
No? What a great podcast we run.
Well, that is nothing that I want to get into until we get into the episode.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. All right, so again, I know I mentioned this last time, but my notes like might not be beat by beat in terms of like they might not be 100% accurate in terms of where it takes place in the episode, because I tried to like organize the plot breakdown based on what makes sense as we're talking about it.
Whereas I'm a bit more
beat by beat. So you might just have to hold off on some of your notes until we get to the scene I'm talking about. What?
I wish you wouldn't. I've got them in order.
All right, fine. All right, if I go to change scene, then you jump in.
I'm going to pull you back.
That's fine.
Actually, there is one thing I want to mention, which we did mention last time.
Yeah.
Which I'd like to bring up again. Obviously, this is, from what I can remember, the first Doctor Who episode that I remember.
Oh yeah, I forgot you said that.
Yeah, this is like this
is the first one you saw. Would you have seen this live, or would you have watched this on like reruns?
This was live. My parents were watching. I think they were watching Doctor Who a little bit around this time. I think everybody was, really, weren't they?
I don't think it became as much of a mainstream normal thing until like series like 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think they were kind of, you know, what's on BBC One.
Now, don't get me wrong, it did well. I mean, it had good viewing figures, but when I think of like peak Doctor Who, when you went into like Toys R Us and
you're
they were
looking
like
at Tennant era.
Yeah, I'm thinking like series 3. I'm thinking the gold logo, Tennant and Martha, that kind of era is what I'm thinking.
But yeah, I vividly remember this episode. And again, when we, like I said in the last podcast, when we came around to watch this a couple of years ago, and it being the first time I'd properly watched it, I remembered majority of the episode.
So it's interesting that you remembered the plot and everything. Because I find a lot of the time, if you think back to like when you were a kid and you watched your first episode, you probably just remembered like images.
Well, I remembered not only obviously the monsters of the week, because as a kid I think they had that kind of uncanny valley kind of.
Because the CG is not great.
Yeah, it's not great, but that kind of makes it creepier.
Yeah.
So that always stuck in my head as a kid, and then growing up into an adult.
I can't remember if it was like me or my brother. It might have been my brother, but one of us had action figures of the Reapers.
Creepy.
Between the two of us, we had loads of Doctor Who action figures, but I think it was my brother who had like the Reaper and like the arm wings things like folded out and has like the little mouth on the chest.
Yeah.
It's quite big as well.
Yeah, I think also I'm very close with my dad. So I think this episode kind of stuck with me a lot as well.
Yeah.
Because...
I mean, if you watched this live, then you would have been 6.
Yeah. So I think it's always...
So you probably would have been about the age that Rose is in the start.
Yeah, when Jackie's talking to her.
Yeah.
But I think that's that kind of thing. I mean, I'm close with both my parents, but I think it's one of those things that it makes you, even as a child, it makes you think about those things and about what would life be like without my parents.
I think as a child, you don't have the emotional maturity yet to find some things like say as a child, even though Dalek can be quite sad in terms of what happens to that Dalek, and like say when we watched it this last time and I felt quite emotional in that episode. I never did as a child because I think you kind of lack that emotional intelligence, but I think this is one of those things where it's way easier to be empathetic because it hits closer to home.
Yeah, it's like the one thing you truly know as a child, isn't it? It's your parents, it's your family.
And that's the thing. I think as a child you would miss the nuance in this episode, particularly of Pete. Of the way he behaves and the way he treats Rose and the things he does for her. But I think being able to empathize with Rose's situation and think about what life would be like if my dad weren't here, I think that's something that, I don't know, it's a bit more tangible for kids to comprehend rather than big scary bog monster.
Yeah. But yeah, should we get into it?
Yeah. So the episode begins with a young Rose. Like I say, she probably looks about 5-6 years old maybe. She sat on the end of the bed with Jackie, who's telling her about her dad, and basically says that he was killed when she was a baby. He was killed in a hit and run. The driver was like a kid or something. But
well, they didn't say what.
Oh, did they not mention that in the beginning?
Well, they didn't know, did they?
Yeah, it was a hit and run. The driver drove away. Because they say he was never found. But Rose's dad, Pete, essentially died alone before the ambulance could arrive. By the time the ambulance got there, he was already dead. Well,
in my notes, I've put, again, it's good when you get that soon into the episode and you have notes, but it's like, damn, that is such a cold-hearted thing to tell like a child.
I thought
like your father died alone.
I know.
Damn.
I get that she was maybe telling the story and then she kind of got
swept.
She kind of forgot that Rose was there maybe, and she was just kind of reminiscing herself. But yeah, I know what you mean. That I thought the same thing of like, Jesus, like.
Well, I guess it's one of those.
I guess that's how you talk. Like maybe like if your child was a teenager, but like when your child's like 5, you maybe beat around the bush a little bit.
I guess it's one of those things that. I mean, Jackie's very motherly towards Rose, but I do wonder sometimes if their relationship is less motherly and daughterly. Do you mean sometimes it's a bit more like sisters or family members? Do you mean like she doesn't always treat her as her daughter? She treats her as, maybe she's a bit more open or a bit more.
I don't know. I know what you mean because they come across quite close in that sense, like in the sense that like they could be friends. But I think like when Rose shows up after disappearing for a year.
Oh, yeah,
and that seems like a very motherly response.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying in that sense of you kind of get the vibe that Jackie is very open with Rose about things, like partners she's had. Do you know what I mean? Whereas like some mothers would be a bit more reserved about that. I think I
wonder if that's a class thing.
I don't think so. I just think maybe it's because I'm not sure how old Jackie was when she had Rose, but maybe if she was a younger mum, you generally find that with like.
She's obviously not because the lady who plays Jackie, Camille something, Kaduri, something like that. She's obviously not, but I assume that when she had Rose, she was meant to have been in her like 20s.
Yeah, I'm guessing something like that.
Because she's very much not in her 20s in this episode.
And neither is Pete in his 20s.
Yeah, but considering that Rose is like 19 and Jackie, I assume, is in her 40s.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, maybe a younger mother and that kind of, trying to be everything.
Yeah. But obviously we have this kind of framing device of Jackie telling a young Rose, and then we cut to Rose, essentially like a grown-up Rose now, repeating the story to the Doctor in the TARDIS. And she asked the Doctor if he can take her to see him before he died, sorry, because she mentioned how he died alone and there was no one there, and she'd like to be the person to go and comfort him, essentially, as he slips away into death.
It's a dark opener.
Yeah. The Doctor says something like, "What's brought this on?" She's like, "Oh, if you can't do it." And he's like, "Well, no, I can do it, but, you know, your wish is my command, but be careful what you wish for."
Yeah. Well, it's funny because Rose mentions, you know, if you can't do it because of time. And
Yeah.
So it's like she obviously knows.
She's obviously a bit kind of switched on.
Yeah, she's
in that
aware.
sense. Yeah. But that's essentially the "be careful what you wish for" is essentially the final line before we get our sting and the title sequence. Once the episode kind of opens for real, we have Pete and Jackie at their wedding in like the registry office. It's not a very glamorous wedding.
No, Pete can't remember her names.
To be fair, who can? Can you?
No.
Jackie.
It's like Suzette or something.
No, it's
or
not.
is that what he says? And
Yeah, because it's like he says like Suzanne, but it's actually meant to be like, yeah, something like that. I can't remember. She's got like a million middle names. It's like Dumbledore.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Pete is like getting the names wrong, and Jackie's just kind of like, "Oh, let's just get on with it."
Yeah.
Essentially. And this is when we find that the Rose and the Doctor are kind of in the back of the registry office, kind of just watching this happen. And yeah, like say Rose kind of just asked if she can be there when he dies. So this is when the TARDIS lands in 1987. We have our Bad Wolf reference. There's this shot with the Doctor and Rose kind of standing on a corner of a street, and the camera's like behind a wall, and it kind of pans left round the corner, and on the wall there's a bunch of like graffiti and posters on the wall. I noticed one of the posters is for Energize, and it looks like someone's kind of graffitied Bad Wolf over the poster.
Yeah.
So the reason Pete is here is he was running late as he was getting a wedding gift for Stuart and Sarah, who are kind of local friends, I guess.
Yeah.
He was getting a vase or a vase, depending on how posh you are.
Or however you pronounce it.
Yeah, so the Doctor and Rose are standing on the corner of the street, basically with the intention of when Pete gets hit, Rose is going to go over and comfort him.
Yeah.
So this car pulls around the corner, speeding round, hits Pete. He drops the vase. He sort of keels over. The Doctor tells Rose to go to him, and she doesn't.
Well, before the car hits him, I've noted one thing that Rose says, which I think it's like, God, it hits hard, is that she's explaining to the Doctor what happens, and she can see that it's about to happen, and she literally says like, "Oh God, this is it." And it's like, oh my God, like that hits so...
that's the thing, because if you heard this story as a kid, and the thing is, if Jackie's anything like my mum, Rose has probably heard this story like 50 times.
Oh.
So, you know, you hear about something and you build up this like expectation of it in your head, and then imagine actually being there and then seeing the moments leading up to it, and you're like, oh my, like it would be really upsetting and jarring. And
well, she even says, doesn't she? She's like, I thought the day my dad died would be like a stormy day, a dark, thundery, raining day, but it's just any normal day.
Just a normal day. Yeah, well, that's the thing, you would, wouldn't you? Because that's the thing, you think like, oh, this is such an awful day. You know, you kind of picture like the least comfortable setting you would. You think it would be storming and thunder and lightning and all this kind of, I don't know, kind of just gloomy setting. And yeah, when you realise it's just a normal kind of overcast day in London. Yeah. So she doesn't go to him, and he dies, as previously mentioned, before the ambulance arrives.
Yeah, on his own.
And she's kind of like breaking down. You can tell she's kind of like disappointed in herself for not being able to do it. And she asks the Doctor if she can try again. And this episode for me, right, is maybe one of the best explorations, maybe even better than Dalek, in terms of the Doctor as a character.
Yeah, it's the nuance, like in the little facial movements.
Eccleston's great.
He is, yeah.
I swear I say it like every episode, but Christopher Eccleston is so good. Yeah, that thing of, she says, "Can I try again?" And in that one look, you can tell it's like,
he doesn't want to do it.
I shouldn't,
Yeah.
but he does anyway. And it's because of, I don't think it's obviously not just like empathy or sympathy for Rose's kind of situation and predicament, but it's that thing of, they've developed this bond together now.
Yeah.
Sorry. They've developed this bond together now, and like I say, he just wants her to, I don't say be happy, because that kind of simplifies it too much, but he obviously wants what's best for her. He wants to comfort her, so he knows he shouldn't do it, but he does anyway. He goes against his own better judgment, essentially. So then we kind of like smash cut to that same corner again, that same shot of the camera panning round past the Bad Wolf poster, and the Doctor and Rose are standing where they originally were, but now we see the newer versions of them hiding behind the corner. So the Doctor basically says, like, we're going to wait for them to leave. She's going to run off. He's going to go after her. When that happens, you need to run to him. And I can't remember what she said. She says something like, "I don't know if I can do this," something like that. But I know that he basically says, "You don't have to do anything you don't want to, but this is the last time we can be here."
Yeah.
He says, like, two versions of us
Was already
has already made this a really weak spot in time. This is the last time we can be here.
Which is not only a good story plot,
Yeah.
but it's also good for like lore. So
Yeah.
you know that going on in the future, that every time people go back to a certain point, it weakens.
Well, yeah, well, that's the thing, because we know two people can be, like, I think of every multi-Doctor story, do you know what I mean? The people can be in the same period of time more than once, and it's like, I think theoretically they could have gone back a third time, but I think that's the Doctor essentially drawing a line in the sand, do you know what I mean? And saying, I can't risk having three of us here.
Yeah.
It's not as if,
we're
like,
gonna cross
two
paths.
is the limit, but it's like, it's him saying, I'm not going to risk it anymore.
Yeah.
You do what you need to do, or we leave, and that's it, essentially. So the hit-and-run driver pulls around the corner, goes to run over Pete for the third time, I guess. But this time, Rose, as in the most recent Rose, runs out from the corner, runs straight past the Doctor and Rose, and sort of tackles her father in the road, and basically knocks him out of the way of the car, saving his life, essentially. I love that shot of the original Doctor and Rose, kind of like their heads kind of like pivot really quick as Rose runs past, and they look kind of like surprised, obviously. But then they end up disappearing since the timeline gets overwritten. So they kind of vanish. Rose is obviously ecstatic because she says something like, "Oh my God, he was going to kill you."
And
Her London accent really comes out, doesn't it?
I love her dad being like, oh, give me more credit than that. I was going to let him run over me. It's like,
I did see him coming. Yeah. So she's kind of obviously ecstatic about being able to save her father.
Yeah.
Doctor, not so much. There's that shot, isn't there, where the camera pans back to the
she's
Doctor.
being all like smiley, and she goes to look back to the Doctor, like reassurance, be like, "Look what I did!" And the death
Oh, he looks
stare.
furious.
Oh, he does. You would be scared, wouldn't you? You'd be like,
Yes,
"Oh God, what have I
100%.
done?"
Yeah.
Which you can sense that off Rose from the next scene, because they go back to.
There's a tension, isn't there, which she tries to kind of ignore.
Yeah, they go back to, well, Jackie and Rose's and Pete's flat in the past.
Yeah, because they kind of introduce each other first, and Rose says, "My name's Rose," and he says, "Well, that's coincidence, that's my daughter's name." He kind of says, like, "I'm on my way to a wedding," and they kind of just lie and say they go into the same wedding, so they all get a lift with Pete, essentially, and they meet back at his flat. I'm pretty sure this is when we get our first cut to... we get the POV shots of the Reapers,
Yeah.
which kind of just looks like everything's just a bit red, really, isn't it? That's kind of like, it's basically like a drone shot, but everything's got a red filter on it.
Yeah. Is it a drone or a Dalek? It's like the Dalek
Yeah,
lens,
you know, like the
but
Dalek's
red.
POV where it's blue. Yeah, it's that, but red.
Yeah.
And yeah, you kind of just like flying around, and then you see some people kind of go, "Ah!" and then that's it. We don't really see much happen. Inside Pete's flat, Pete goes into the other room. I don't know, is he getting changed or something? I can't remember what he's doing.
I think so, or something like that.
I can't remember what he's doing, but he goes into the other room. The Doctor and Rose are standing there, and this is what we were talking about, where there's a clear like tension here, but Rose is like trying to ignore it, so she's like picking Pete's stuff up.
Yeah, and she's like, "Oh, look at his stuff on display where it should be," and she just looks back at the Doctor, and he doesn't say anything.
He's kind of standing there with his
fuming.
arms crossed, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's finding various bits and pieces. She says like health drinks, solar panels he was working on. She fancies him to be like a bit of a businessman type of thing. He's got loads of projects in the works. The Doctor essentially accuses her of planning this from the beginning. He says, I mentioned it travels in space and you weren't interested. As soon as I said time machine, you came along.
Yeah.
And she says something like, I didn't plan this from the start. It was just, I just saw I could do something, essentially.
Yeah, and I did it.
Yeah.
And he says, I picked another stupid ape. And the way he says it, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's like cutting.
Yeah, because it's not the first time he said that, because he says, he refers to humans as apes in, I think it's in Rose. He says that like they're having an argument about something, and he says something like, I'm too busy trying to save the life of every stupid ape on this planet, or something like that. So I think that's that thing of, obviously we spent the last few episodes essentially with the Doctor thinking the Rose is different.
Especially after the last episode, the long game, after seeing how Adam reacted.
Yeah, 100%.
And
I think
she's better.
I think that's what makes this sad, because it's not just like, oh, the Doctor's annoyed that she broke the rules of time, but this is, the Doctor essentially thinks that she's broken his trust.
Yeah.
And the development they've had is essentially nullified here, because he's just reverted her essentially back to being another ape. Which I think is a lot more nuanced than I would have picked up as a kid.
I think it's interesting as well, because she doesn't apologise. She just snaps, and she's like, well, it's not like I changed history. I just saved one man. What difference does it make?
Yeah. The Doctor says, it's, I picked another stupid ape. It's not about seeing the universe. It never is. It's about what it can do for you. Yeah, so Rose gets kind of defensive. She says like, "Why can you go around saving people if I can't?" And he says like, "I know what I'm doing."
He says about his people and how his family and they all died. And he's thought about going back, but he knows he can't. Because
he says, "Don't my people, my entire race are dead. You don't think I would have gone back and saved them?" Which is a very good counter argument. Yeah, which Rose doesn't really.
Yeah, it's like, don't get me wrong, losing a father is a massive thing, but the Doctor lost everyone.
Yeah.
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 And he did it himself.
Yeah, and Rose immediately starts cutting with the deep wounds by saying like, basically, you're just jealous. You're not the most important man in my life anymore.
Yeah. And he threatens to leave her. He's like,
he basically says, okay, if I'm so like, I can't remember what word he uses, but if I'm so like, insignificant, if I'm so unimportant, then I'll just leave. Then give me the TARDIS key back. So she gives him the key.
And then she's like, I know how alone you are.
Yeah, she says, I know how sad you are.
I know you'll wait outside that box for me, and I'll make you wait a long time. It's so vicious. It's like she knows she's in the wrong, but she's just going to stand on that hill.
Thing is, you totally understand why both of these characters are behaving this way, because I find like a personal sort of gripe of mine, a pet peeve, is when two characters have a tiff, an argument, a falling out, a fight, whatever you want to call it. And you can tell it's obviously something that has to happen for the plot to develop in a specific way. And you can kind of see how the writer was moving the pieces to get this to happen. Where this feels totally like, I totally understand why the Doctor behaves the way he does. And I totally understand why Rose behaves the way she does. And I totally see why those two perspectives are at odds with each other. Yeah. And how it would naturally cause this relationship to deteriorate, essentially. Yeah, Rose says, I know you're not going to leave without me. The Doctor wanders off. Yeah, she screams, I'll make you wait a long time. And then Pete sticks his head around the corner and goes, boyfriend trouble.
She's like, not a couple. Why does everybody think we are?
Yeah. That kind of becomes a running gag later on with Ten and Donna. Yeah. Where everyone assumes they're like married or they're a couple. And they have to keep going, no, we're not together.
Is this the bit you're on about that's a little bit uncomfortable to watch, with the with her dad saying like, well well, how pretty you are, and she's like,
it's not that. Because that's when she goes on like, oh, there is not even a thing that. No, for me, it's when they get to the church. I'll tell you when we get there, but essentially they get in his car and start heading to the church. I think from here we actually cut to the church.
Yeah, it's with the groom and his father.
Yes, his father's basically saying like, it's not too late to pull out, you know.
Yeah.
10 years down the line, you wish you could turn the clock back and all that stuff. What a supporting father figure. It's the church is only like a quarter full. Half, 3/4 of the people essentially haven't turned up. So obviously people are starting to stress a little bit. Sarah, the bride, arrives outside. And who gets out of the car but Jackie Tyler with baby Rose.
And her fabulous 80s hair.
Yeah, very,
big old bouffant.
Very permed.
Yes. That's one thing I do love about this, like the 80s styles. And it's one of those things that you see a lot of 80s styles nowadays, and it's like... they've taken the best part of 80s styles and kind of glamorized it. It's like, oh no, it's the tacky 80s stuff.
Yeah, when we get like nostalgic for previous decades, we tend to glorify it, don't we? So that's why, like, when you think like, remember a couple of years ago when like 80s music was making a bit of a comeback, so modern songs were kind of trying to sound 80s, and they all sound a bit like Whitney Houston, a bit like synth pop, maybe like Depeche Mode, something like that, but they never sound like, I don't know, like Rick Astley. Do you know what I mean? Like nothing sounded like Never Gonna Give You Up or whatever. We tend to like glorify it and try to take the best stuff. And we kind of have these rose tinted glasses then of thinking, oh, this is what the 80s were like. But it's like, we get to see it in all its tacky glory.
Yeah, this is what the 80s was like.
Yeah.
And I do love that.
Yeah. We cut back to the Reapers. In more POV shots where they're just kind of attacking people.
Attacking children.
Yeah, we see a kid on a swing set who we later learn is a young Mickey.
Yeah.
And he's kind of on the swing looking around, and we get these like, it cuts between him on the swing and these POV shots. We slowly see the park that was once full slowly kind of disappearing, like one, like person by person, and then Mickey gets scared and eventually just books it out of there because he realizes everyone has gone.
I didn't realize until, well, obviously we've seen this, but at the time I didn't realize there was that much of an age gap between Rose and Mickey, because Rose is like a baby.
Yeah,
Mickey's
Rose
like
is a baby,
child.
and Mickey looks about
like
4 or 5.
Yeah, well, I guess that's not that much of an age gap, but the two of them together, you would assume they're, maybe a year.
You would assume
them.
they were like childhood friends or something. But I guess obviously Rose is 19. That would make Mickey in his like mid-20s maybe.
Yeah.
Like I know what you mean. Yeah, watching Rose, you'd assume they're about the same age.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So the Doctor is heading back to his TARDIS. Do you think he would have left?
I don't...
Because later on he says, I wasn't going to leave. But he looks like he's about to leave now, and he puts the key in, and when he opens the door, instead of being greeted with the actual TARDIS console, it's just a police box.
Which I did note, wouldn't it have been funny if it was just a police box, and he just got the wrong one?
He just walked into the wrong one.
Just walks into the wrong one. There was like a universal key for a police box, and he just opened it, and it was like...
Yeah, you see him step out.
Go around the next corner.
You see him panic, like step outside, and you realise, I just parked next to another one.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, never mind. So the TARDIS has just turned into like a normal police box. The Doctor seems to realise something and immediately runs, presumably back after Rose.
Yeah.
Do you think if it was the TARDIS, he would have left?
I don't think he would have left, but I think he would have sat in there for a good while.
Like Rose predicted?
Maybe. Well... Maybe he would have left, but he would have come back for her. But he wouldn't have left her there. I don't think he's like that. But I think he would have had to have taken some time away.
Yeah.
I don't know how time works in the TARDIS. Is it exactly the same? Is it slightly different? Could he have stayed in there for a couple of hours and it been...
There are a couple of occasions where characters say that time does feel weird in there.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't know whether the Doctor would feel that or whether that's just a human side effect.
Or maybe he just, sits in there and listens to some angry music, has a little scream into a pillow, and then picks her up.
Speaking of music, Pete and Rose are in the car on the way to the church. I was, funny enough, I was talking about Never Gonna Give You Up. That's playing on the radio. And then the radio kind of glitches and it gets interrupted by Don't Mug Yourself, which I think was like early noughties.
Yeah, she said, "Oh, this isn't out yet."
Yeah, it's like 2002, I think. Yeah, she says like, "This isn't out yet," and he says something like, "I hope not. I don't understand this rubbish," or something like that. Rose tries to make a phone call. He says like, "Is that a phone?" Because obviously,
I know, she just whips out her mobile phone. It's like,
Yeah.
come on, Rose, you've already messed up once today. Like,
yeah.
be slightly away.
She tries to make. I don't know who she's trying to call.
Maybe the TARDIS.
Yeah, maybe. She tries to make a phone call anyway, and she gets the Watson, come here, I need you. Just kind of repeating. As they pull up to the church, the car from earlier that nearly killed Pete kind of just appears out of nowhere and nearly hits them, and Rose yells, "Dad!" And then they don't crash, but they kind of they abruptly stop.
Swerve, yeah.
Swerve onto like the pavement, and they get out.
I've got a little interesting fact here.
Yeah.
Not that it really matters, but I recognise the road. You know, when it shows the car coming towards them?
Yeah.
I recognise the road it was on.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you'll know this, but it's the top of Heel Trelai in Ely.
I'm going to assume that you've just butchered that pronunciation.
Oh, Heel.
Heel. I'm assuming that's a hail, is it?
Probably. Well, it's how we pronounce it, Heel Trelai.
Yeah, that's how we people that don't speak Welsh pronounce Welsh places.
Well, again, my family members live around here, so I know
I
that's
know,
how
but that's the
everybody
thing.
pronounces it.
That's the thing, because I'm not familiar with that area. It's like I could go on Google Maps or something and find it, and I would pronounce it the way I would assume it's pronounced in Welsh. That's, I mean, the locals just have their own names for it.
Yeah, as well as Trelai.
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 Okay.
But there's a building in the back, and that used to be the old Elywood studios. They used to have studios there, which they used to film stuff in. But yeah, so I was like,
Cool.
I know.
It's always nice when you recognise something, especially because if you do recognise something, it's always like, oh, it's Queen Street again. But when you recognise something maybe a bit closer to home,
Yeah.
literally sometimes, then
Well,
it's like,
yeah.
yeah, it's kind of cool. So after Rose and Pete get out of the car, they bump into Jackie, who is immediately suspicious of Rose. There's kind of like a big argument. We get this thing that Pete maybe cheated on Jackie in the past.
Yeah. Well, he says he didn't, but it seems very suspicious.
It's not.
Doesn't it?
It's never actually confirmed whether he did or not, because Jackie is almost certainly the type of person to blow things out of proportion. So if it was nothing, she would have made a big deal out of it.
Saying that,
but we also
though,
know that Pete is not the best person and would immediately try to damage control.
But I think it's one of those things that, again, you could assume that Jackie would probably, like you said, overthink things. But she often brings up like multiple. There's been multiple women in the past, and like, oh, you know.
Yeah.
So I guess from this context, you can assume that maybe if he may haven't have cheated, but he hasn't been completely.
Do you think maybe he's maybe flirted a couple times, and she's like, maybe, I don't know.
Or maybe he's done more. Who knows?
Maybe exaggerated a little bit, and she at least assumes that he's had flings, because he says something like, what was it? We were in a cupboard or something, and the rack fell, and we fell under the duffel coats or something like that.
Yeah.
And someone walked in when they were under the duffel coats, and it looked suspicious.
And Rose is like, "You're cheating."
Yeah, Rose says something like, "Were you fooling around?"
And she's like, "What does it matter to you?"
Yeah.
Jackie just snapping at her.
Jackie rips into him, because not only basically accuses him of being unfaithful, but also says he's a failure. He probably told you he was a big businessman, but he's not. He's got all these get-rich-quick schemes.
Yeah, he was.
Because Rose even says earlier, like, "Oh, you're a bit of a Del boy," something like that.
He's like, "Have you met my Jackie?"
Yeah. But yeah, she proper rips into him.
She literally said, "He's a born failure."
That's ruthless.
That is
ruthless. So harsh.
But it's typical Jackie, isn't it? It makes me laugh as well. There's when Rose sees Jackie for the first time, she just stands there with her mouth open. She's like, "What are you looking at with your mouth open?" She's like,
Yeah.
Your hair."
Yeah, this is the bit I was talking about that makes me cringe. It's the your hair. I've never seen it like. I mean, it's lovely. Your hair. It's lovely, and your baby. That would be your baby. And I'm like, Rose, shut up, please.
She's
this is so uncomfortable to watch.
It very obvious. It feels very Philosopher's Stone.
In what way?
Just kind of
I'm very curious as to where you take this.
like you're a wizard, Harry. And he's like, "What? Me? A wizard?"
I'm a what?
A what? Yeah, it feels very that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I find this very cringe, but not in a way that it's like written badly. It obviously makes sense because Rose is like shell shocked, and whatever. But I just find this very like when I'm watching this episode. As much as I love this episode, I want to skip forward like a minute.
Oh no, it's not that
with
bad.
This bit. I
Come on, I think we'd all kind of be like that. Can you imagine seeing your mum in the 80s?
But that's what I mean. I totally understand why Rose is doing it, but I find this way more uncomfortable to watch than anything in like Love and Monsters.
Saying that though, I mean, to be fair, Jackie looks obviously she is no different, but she looks no different other than her hair.
Yeah.
So, I guess the only thing she could pick up on, your hair and a baby.
Yeah. At this point, we have young Mickey running up to the church and he's yelling about monsters.
And they're like, "Oh, little aliens."
Yeah.
Oh.
What monsters is it? Is it aliens? And then it's kind of laughing at him, which bit rude. Like you'd think, try and comfort the child at least.
Yeah. And then this bit, I love this bit. The thing of doctors running down the road. She goes, "Rose," and Rose's smug face when she turns
so
around.
smug.
She's like, "Yeah, you've come back for me." And then how quickly it's so good. It's acted so well.
Yeah.
Her face turns to instant panic when she can see like he's.
Yeah, he's running.
He's running.
Saying,
he's like, "Get in the church."
He goes, "Rose, get in the church." And he kind of like, his eyes dart up to the left and she turns around. And then we finally see our monster of the week appear because we've just seen kind of POV shots up to this point. And yeah, the Reapers are kind of bat-like. It's kind of like a bat, but if it had a longer body.
It's like a pterodactyl.
Yeah.
That's how I always kind of thought of them. Like pterodactyl with more legs, but an octopus mouth on its belly.
Yeah, I was saying it doesn't have a beak like a pterodactyl because it's kind of got a face. The face kind of reminds me of like the Sycorax masks, like that kind of like, it's kind of like pointy but not very many facial features. And then it's kind of got a mouth in its chest.
Yeah.
And it's got wings, like big wings, kind of like a dragon or a wyvern type thing. And then it's kind of got like little arms that cover the mouth on its chest. It's kind of a cool design.
It's very creepy. Very, what's the word? Oh, I know this is going to be a bit of a tangent, but you know, Bloodborne.
Like Lovecraftian.
Lovecraftian, thank you, yeah. Very Lovecraftian.
Yeah, no, I get that. That makes sense. So the Reaper appears and it eats the vicar and...
It eats the groom's dad.
Stuart's father gets destroyed as well.
Yeah, he just runs off.
Yeah.
He didn't want to go to the wedding anyway.
He just didn't want the wedding to happen.
He didn't.
Yeah. Got the length some people will go to. Yeah. So everybody packs inside of the church, all panicked. Yeah, I'm with you completely. I love this moment. And it's moments like that. I mean, this whole episode that makes me realise Billie Piper's a good actress, considering that before this, she was a pop star and she wasn't really...
Which weirds me out and I always forget about.
Yeah, I think she wasn't really an actress. She might have like had a bit part in something that I'm not aware of, but she was not an established actress at all.
Yeah.
I remember I don't remember at the time, but I've since learnt that apparently there was a bit of controversy when her casting was revealed because people thought, not sure about this. Do you know what I mean? The Doctor, who's always been like an elegant, scholarly man, is now all of a sudden played by this rough-looking northern man in a leather jacket and a buzz cut.
Yeah.
And the companion is now this kind of chavvy girl played by a pop star.
Yeah.
So I think there was some controversy at first. But yeah, I think this makes you realise that like Billie Piper can act.
Yeah.
Pretty well. And I've said it a million times, Christopher Eccleston he might be my favourite. I don't know. But anyway, once they all pack inside of the church, the Doctor essentially takes lead immediately. And that's what makes me laugh, because some doctors kind of feel like they have to earn their right to be in control. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's always someone like, who put you in charge? And he has to kind of go on this spiel about, oh, I'm 900 years old. I'm the oncoming storm. I'm the destroyer of worlds. You listen to me, and I'm going to save your life. Where, like, he immediately just comes in and he just goes, you, over there, check the doors. I'm going to... And he just immediately assumes control, and everyone's okay with it.
Except Jackie.
She doesn't put up much of a fight.
She's like, what are you jabbering on about?
Yeah, the doctor essentially comes in and says, the walls are old. That should stop them for a while. Jackie says, like, what's going on? The doctor says... there's a wound in time, and they've essentially come to sterilize the wound. And she says something like, he says that they're like bacteria sterilizing the wound by consuming everything. Yeah, and she's like, what are you on about time? And he just says, he basically just puts her in a place immediately and says, Jackie Tyler, for once in your life, do as I say. Go and check the door. She goes, yes, sir, and just like runs off.
He's like, I've been waiting to say this for ages.
He says, I should have done that ages ago. So he talks to the groom, Stuart, and basically says that. The Stuart says, can you save us, type of thing. What's going on? And the doctor says, look, I'm trying my best. This is when he gives the doctor his father's phone, because his father was trying to call someone earlier about the wedding, wasn't it? And he's hearing that, Watson, come here, I need you. And the doctor immediately recognizes it as Alexander Graham Bell. That was the first ever phone call that seems to be looping on all telephones nearby, including Rose's superphone.
Yeah, which is interesting, but I guess I mean, the TARDIS has just become a police box, so... Yeah.
We never really get an explanation as to why that happened.
Is it similar to... oh, God. I'm trying to remember. The episode with Matt Smith where everything happens all at once.
Oh, the Wedding River song?
Yeah, kind of like that. Where time's kind of falling in on itself, so things...
But I still feel like the TARDIS wouldn't just... like I don't know why the TARDIS just ceases to exist.
I guess it's... Well, the TARDIS doesn't like paradoxes, does it?
No, the TARDIS normally has
on,
TARDIS normally has like paradox fail safes kind of like built into it. I don't know.
Maybe the TARDIS is trying to.
Maybe the TARDIS doesn't like the paradox, so it's trying to run away.
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, outside the church, the Reapers are kind of just flying around, eating everybody. The Doctor takes a look out the window and he sees that same car again, kind of just like appear. Sorry, I had a voice crack then. It kind of appears, drives around the corner. We see the driver inside kind of like lift his arm up to cover his eyes as if he's like reacting to the way that...
well, Pete hits his bonnet, basically.
Yeah, as if he's still reacting even though Pete isn't there. And then the car just kind of like disappears. And it's kind of just doing that on a loop, which obviously the Doctor notices. And again, we don't really find this out till later on when Pete and Rose have a more like one-to-one conversation, but you can kind of tell the Doctor's already piecing something together here.
Well, I think it's quite interesting because Pete joins him at this point, and you can see that Pete also kind of realises that
obviously he doesn't understand the stakes yet, but Pete kind of he thinks he notices the car, doesn't he? Because he says like, was that a car? And the Doctor says like, don't worry about it, and walks off essentially. This is when Pete goes up to Rose and they kind of have this conversation where he says... He basically says he just trusts her implicitly.
Yeah. He says, I gave you my car keys. I would never give my car keys to a stranger. And he's like, I just trusted you from like the moment we kind of met.
Yeah. And this is what I love about Pete. Pete, despite being framed as maybe not the brightest guy, like say he's not like a smart businessman, he's a bit of a Del boy, he's all about these get-rich-quick schemes, and he's not as smart as you'd probably think he should be.
Yeah.
He clearly is very switched on, because he works this out very quickly. And, he says, why do I trust you? I gave you my car keys. You called me Dad.
He's like, you sound like Jackie when you shout.
When you shout, you sound like Jackie. And he essentially works out that she's his Rose.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, props.
That's hell of...
Because you expect that to be something that's going to be like a big reveal or something towards the end, but he works it out himself.
I think it's a hell of a thing to jump to, isn't it? Because...
Imagine if he said that and she's like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude?
I mean, like, can you imagine just in our normal day now, just being like, oh, and you are my son. It's like, how did you get to that?
Yeah. Yeah, he says, you're my Rose, and then the two of them kind of embrace and hug each other, which is very sweet.
Yeah.
I always thought that, you know, when they nearly crash and Rose yells, Dad, and they get out of the car and he says, like, why'd you call me Dad? And she doesn't, like, say anything. I remember even as a kid thinking, immediate response to this, I would say, I was involved in a car accident with my dad when I was younger, I have PTSD. That would be my go-to excuse.
Fair enough.
But I remember, I don't know why, it's very specific, but I just remember even as a child thinking that would have been my excuse immediately. I didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, she kind of just sits there like...
I guess she's, again, a bit shocked in the moment.
Yeah.
One thing that was said before Pete and the doctor noticed the car, which I thought was interesting, but is... Rose mentions to the doctor that obviously time has been damaged, and she asks him, is this my fault?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And he doesn't say anything, but it's like, of course this is your fault.
Yeah, well, he doesn't say anything, but the look says it all.
Yeah.
And he walks away, and Pete kind of overheard the conversation, didn't he?
Yeah.
So I think that's also why
he's kind of worked it out.
Pete kind of worked it out, yeah, because when he works out that, you know, you call me Dad or whatever, and...
Your friend
said...
this is your fault.
This is your fault, which isn't true. Rose asked if it was her fault.
Yeah.
But yeah, he said, your friend said, this is your fault. And he says, I'm supposed to be dead. And he kind of works it out.
Yeah. Well, that's later on, because he actually asks Rose.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, because they have to have this conversation first. But first we have Stuart and Sarah come up to the doctor.
Yeah.
And they essentially ask if he can save them. I was very distracted during this whole thing. I never noticed it before, but Stuart has a diamond earring.
You've never noticed that before?
No, I never noticed it, and I saw it this time, and I could not focus on anything he was saying.
I'm surprised
because I was so distracted
it.
by his little earring.
80s, baby.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It was his left ear as well.
Well, yeah, it's just...
Yeah, I know, but isn't that the gay ear?
Well...
Isn't that the thing?
I don't know. Just everybody in the 80s had their ears pierced, I swear.
Just everyone in the 80s was gay. I mean, you could argue that was the decade that, you know, people experimented more.
I don't know.
I mean, that's kind of when, like, AIDS kind of blew up, wasn't it? Wasn't that the 80s?
Yeah, that was the 80s, but I think... I don't know. I think 70s was pretty big for experimenting.
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of like hippie culture and stuff from the late 60s, probably. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot
of
drugs and...
I think in the 80s it became more...
Like Woodstock and stuff in the 70s, I guess.
Yeah, I think it became more mainstream because a lot of very much beloved artists came out.
Yeah, you would have had like your George Michaels, your Freddie Mercurys. Elton John, yeah. So there was a lot of people who obviously were like, well, I love this person and it doesn't change them. Obviously there was a lot of hate still, don't get me wrong. It's kind of like it is now though, isn't it? There still is now, but you know.
Not
I know what you mean. We are progressively getting better. That's what I mean. Like, it's the same thing now. Like, comparing now to the 80s is like comparing the 80s to the 50s, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it is better. Not perfect, but...
We're slowly moving forward.
Yeah.
But I thought this was quite sweet because... The doctors asks them about their story and how they got together.
Yeah, it was like 2 a.m.
Yeah, outside a pub.
Yeah. And
she'd lost her purse and needed a ride home, and he paid for a ride home and wrote his number on her hand or something.
Yeah. Sarah's pregnant as well.
Yeah.
She says something like, I know we're not important or anything. The doctor says, what makes you say that? She says, that, obviously he asked them how they met and they go through this whole thing. And... he says, you know, don't let anyone tell you that you're not important. Don't think you're not important. He says, what a life you've had. Do you know what I mean? I've never had a life like that. He says, yeah, I'll try and save you. And it's just this really nice, sweet kind of moment that makes you think, because I always think of Nine as being one of the more cold and, you know, detached doctors. But this goes to show he does have this compassion and this element of kind of wanting to be human almost. It's like the fact that he refers to people as like apes and stuff when he's angry, he clearly still has this Time Lord kind of
detachment,
higher than thou superiority complex, but you can tell deep down he does kind of.
Well, I think that's what draws him to Earth, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of that, humans just being humans.
Yeah.
And, how the smallest things can be the most important, and the biggest things, can matter so little.
Yeah. Peter's asking Rose about the future.
Yeah.
I love this moment where he says, like, oh, what am I like? Have I gone grey? And she kind of just, like, looks at him, like, obviously thinking,
Well, yeah.
And he just goes, have I gone bald?
It's like, tell me I haven't gone bald. And it's like, oh, God.
Yeah, I do quite like that. Jackie comes in and basically just once again accuses.
She's like, oh, typical you, the world's ending, and you attach yourself to the youngest blonde or something.
Ruthless.
And then Mickey comes running in.
Yeah.
And runs at Rose.
Yeah, gives her like a big hug.
And she's like, oh, God help his future girlfriend. He like attaches himself to whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no.
Which is funny because like he's obviously being a kid, he's really small, like hugging her legs / like around her waist, and it kind of immediately took me back to the end of Rose. When the doctor offers her the trip, and Mickey is like on his knees and he's hugging like around her legs, around her waist, basically in exactly the same way, despite being like a 24-year-old man.
Oh, he's just like, please don't leave.
Yeah, but yeah, Jackie storms off after accusing them of shenanigans,
canoodling or whatever you Brits do.
Yeah, Pete turns around to like follow her, and Rose says, "No, you can't tell her." He says like, "Why not?" And she says something like, "The Jackie I know doesn't know how to use a VCR."
And he's like, "Well, I taught her last week."
Yeah, I taught her last week, and she just like she kind of just looks at him, and he goes, "Right, point taken."
At this point, we cut to the doctor with baby Rose.
Yes.
And I love this line. He's like, oh, Jackie gave me her to look after. He was like, how times have changed.
Yeah.
And he's just like, oh, I love how he's speaking to her. He's like, you're not going to ruin the future, are you?
Yeah, you're not going to end the world, are you, Rose?
It just makes me laugh so much.
Yeah. And then old Rose, 19-year-old Rose,
goes to touch the baby.
Yeah, they kind of have this conversation. The doctor, it basically kind of gives her the rundown of the situation, and she says, "Oh, I can't do anything, right? Can I?"
He's like,
and he says, "Well, if we're being honest, no, you can't. So, like, stay out of it." And he says, "Don't touch the baby.
Don't touch the baby." She goes, "I'm not stupid." And he's like, "You could have fooled me.
You could have fooled me." Yeah, and then he does apologize.
Yeah, and then
he does say, "All right, I'm sorry, but between you and me, I haven't got a plan.
Yeah,
I don't know what I'm doing. My people, the Time Lords, would have stopped this kind of thing from happening, but they're all gone now, and nothing can."
He says, "And just tell me that you're sorry."
Yeah, Rose says she never meant for any of this to happen, and the doctor basically just says, "Just tell me you're sorry," and she says it, and they hug. And
he gives
embrace.
her a big smile, and he hugs her.
Yeah,
he's so good. Even he has no plan. He's thinking, "Oh well, we're fucked." Like,
but it's the little moments, isn't it? It's that thing of like, even if this is the end and they're all gonna die,
he wants to make up, kind of thing.
It's that thing of not just making up so they don't end on like bad terms, but it's that thing of, I think by now he's accepted that this wasn't her plan from the beginning. But yeah, the fact that she gave him a pretty sincere apology, and it's not even that like that thing of, oh, the principle of you saying you're sorry. It's like he genuinely
believes that she's sorry. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting because obviously we know at this point, but nobody else does, that the doctor knows a way to fix this. Yeah. But he doesn't... He's
looking for any other way.
He doesn't want to accept that because he doesn't want to be the guy that basically kills Rose's dad.
Yeah. But when they're hugging, Rose kind of like jumps back and goes, there's something hot. And she reaches inside the doctor's jacket and she throws the TARDIS key onto the floor, and it's kind of glowing gold. It's like pulsing. Clearly it's hot. The Doctor takes his jacket off. Very weird when you see him in just his jumper.
You know, this lovely little V-neck green jumper.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, we know he wears the jumper, but it's so weird. Like those rare occasions you see him without the jacket. I forget how thin he is. I think it's because the jacket's quite boxy, isn't it?
I forget how human he looks.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, doesn't he look nice in his little jumper?
Yeah. So he kind of picks the key up through the jacket, He's using the leather of the jacket to, oven mitt his hands, basically. Yeah. And he says the key's still connected to the TARDIS, and he basically realizes that he can summon it back. He says he needs a battery. Stuart takes the battery out of his dad's phone.
Which I find quite interesting, only because surely Rose's battery would be more powerful out of her phone. I mean, a battery from the 80s versus a battery from the noughties, very different. You think he would have, like...
Oh, I didn't even think you meant that. I thought you meant because she's got, like, the super battery.
Well, no, I didn't even think that. I just meant generally, like, smaller,
I guess
more
the
powerful.
old phone... Is it, though?
Yeah.
Because that's the thing. Would it be a better battery? I would argue that technology has gotten better to the point where you need less power. The old brick phones had massive batteries. Yeah,
but then you look at batteries now, do you know what I mean, and how much they can hold. How much? I think, I don't know. I don't know that much detail, but I assume, looking at things like mobile phone batteries today, I know it's very different.
In this story, it's literally just a way to pay off the phone, isn't it?
I guess that's
true. So they introduced the phone into the story, and it's just a way of having that
and
payoff.
it's sweet, because he's like, oh, Dad's saving the day again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is nice, but yeah.
The Doctor sonics the battery and kind of charges it up. Mm-hmm. Good to know you can do that.
I mean, to be fair, the Sonic did, like, super phone Rose, so I'm sure you could charge it with a little bit of...
Yeah. So he charges the battery, he kind of somehow pairs the battery to the key and charges the key. And then the key kind of just floats in the air, and you kind of see the TARDIS start to materialize. Not properly, like it's not properly landing, but you can kind of see the faint outline of it kind of pulsing as if it's like wanting to come. So the key's floating in the air, and you can kind of just see the lock there.
I love how everyone's just sitting in the aisles, and he just looks at them, he's like, don't touch the key.
Yeah, he basically says that if they do nothing and they just sit there, the TARDIS will materialize and you'll be able to save them all. But if someone touches it, zap, it's gone, they're all going to die. So please, no one touch the key.
At this point, we cut to Pete and Rose having a conversation, and Pete asks why Rose has come back, and she said, "Oh, just by chance." And he's like, "Oh well, very lucky for me, isn't it, that you come back and you saved me." And he asks what he's like in the future, and you can kind of tell at this point he has an inkling, doesn't he? He's got an inkling. And one thing I find really interesting is, even though Rose is talking about how great her dad... She's talking about how great her dad was, not how great her dad is. She was like, you were great. You never, like, left us alone. You were always there for us. But it's like, were, not is. So whether... I mean, I guess you would say that because you're talking in past tense, but... But even then, you would think that... Like you would assume that Pete would think, oh, well, I have, at this point in Rose's life,
Rose would
I've
say,
died.
You will take us. You'll take us for picnics rather than you did take us for picnics.
Or you take us for picnics.
That's what I just said.
Not you will, you do.
Oh, well, she probably wouldn't read her bedtime stories now. She's 19.
No. But do you mean, like, she said, you were always there for us.
Yeah.
Like, you're always there for me. She kind of speaks in past tense. So I wonder if that kind of adds on to it. I guess you could argue that, it could have been 20 years on. Well, it wouldn't have been that, but like, say 10 years on and then he'd passed away. But she's speaking about him in the past tense. Yeah. Because his question is basically, am I a good dad? Yeah, which is so sweet. Yeah. And like I say, she gives him this BS a bit about how, you read me bedtime stories every day, you never missed one, you take us for picnics every Saturday, you were always there for us. Yeah. And it's funny because she's going on this kind of spiel. And you can see she's like crying. And he's
he doesn't say anything, but he's just looking, and you can just tell he doesn't believe it.
Yeah, and then he says,
And that's the
not
thing.
me.
It's not that he doesn't believe it because he's already has this inkling, I think. I just think he,
No,
based on
exact-
what she's saying, he says, doesn't he? That's not me.
Yeah.
He doesn't think he's reliable enough to be that person. He doesn't
Yeah.
believe himself capable of being that good a father,
Yeah.
which is very sad. It's very heartbreaking to me.
And then he's like, I was supposed to die today. And it's like, oh God.
Yeah.
Um.
The doctor kind of rocks up and says to Rose that when time gets sorted out, everyone's going to forget what happened. But he says, what you changed will stay changed. And this is when Pete essentially says, you mean that I'm alive when I'm supposed to be dead? And they kind of just look at him, and he says something like, isn't that right, doctor? And the doctor doesn't say anything. He just kind of looks like, for the first time, very sheepish. Very like, I don't even think it's just for Rose's benefit anymore. I think it's just this thing of like, this is just an uncomfortable situation for everybody.
I guess it's one of those things that the doctor's known, loosely known for trying to save lives and for feeling guilt for not doing it. So I guess he's in that situation where Pete is alive now.
Yeah.
And his death will be on the doctor's hands, even though it's not. You can imagine the doctor would feel that way.
Yeah.
And it's like, Rose has saved him, and if I don't do something, he will die.
Again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this, and again, another point where Jackie comes over, and and Pete says, "This is my daughter," and she's like, "You must have been like 12 or something."
Yeah.
She's like, "How many are there?"
I love Jackie. I think she's such a good character. She's so obnoxious and annoying,
Yeah.
but also funny and sweet
And also
vulnerable
and quite real as well. To me, you can imagine
Yeah.
people react to that, especially when he says, her name's Rose, and she's like, "I can't believe you reused the name."
You gave my daughter a second-hand name. He says, "Do you call them all Rose?" Yeah. Before Jackie comes over, though, there is that one kind of final line, which is probably the line that sticks out to me most in the episode. This is the quote that always comes to my head, which is when Rose says, "This is all my fault," and he says, "No, love, I'm your dad. It's my job for it to be my fault."
Yeah, I do love that. Yeah.
That's the quote that always sticks in my mind with this episode, and I think it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing about this episode we'll go on about later, but I think the dialogue is so well written.
Yeah.
The interactions between Rose and her dad and everyone, really. It's just, I don't know, it's really nice. Isn't
Yeah.
it?
But yeah, we have this thing with Jackie, yeah, where, yeah, that's sick, second-hand name, do you call them all Rose? And Pete says something like, "No, can't you see it's the same Rose?" And he picks up the baby and tries to hand her over to Rose.
And Rose puts her arms out.
Yeah, and the doctor immediately goes, "Rose, no!" And then, soon as they make contact, one of the Reapers appear inside the church.
Yeah.
And everybody panics.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Stupid Rose. Messes with time
I guess
again.
it does happen very quickly, so
It
I
does,
guess
yeah.
it's not like she just made the choice. It was clearly like he thrusted it on her and she like instinctively reached out.
It'd be funny if she dropped it. She was like, "No," and dropped it, and then she's like, "Oh, a lump on the back of my head."
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously before the doctor can do anything, a paradox has been made.
Yeah.
The Reaper, the doctor immediately on the defensive tells everyone to get behind him.
And he's the oldest thing.
Yeah, he says, "I'm the oldest thing in here." The Reaper immediately flies down
And eats him.
and eats him the hell up.
And there's a crunch.
Yep.
I was like, oh my God.
And that's the thing, that's not like, it's so unceremonious.
Yeah.
There's not a big musical build-up or anything. It's literally just like, because there is a musical build-up, and then it stops, and when the doctor says, "I'm the oldest thing in here," there's like nothing playing, and then the Reaper just goes, "Ah!" just flies down and just gets him, and it's so like, it just makes the doctor out to be like a normal bloke.
That's the thing. It shows that even the doctor can't do anything against these things.
Yeah.
Like,
Series 1 does a good job of this, I think, because most of the threats in this series, I feel like the way they overcome feel like they come very naturally. I feel like later on it gets to the point where, the Doctor's just like a god, do you know what I mean? He can do whatever because he's so smart and he's so capable and he always comes up with a plan. Where half the stories in Series 1, the Doctor gets saved by someone else.
This is true, but I think I kind of like the fact that it makes him feel human, but I don't know whether it makes him feel too human to me. I don't know whether it's like, do you mean, I mean, after all, he is a Time Lord. Do you know what I mean? You'd think he's had many lives and he has ample knowledge. Sometimes I feel that it is very human. But I'm not sure. Maybe this, again, it depends on how you feel about things, doesn't it? Whether you prefer a more human Doctor or like one a bit more.
I think most people do like the human Doctor. I think most people like it when the Doctor behaves human. I think that's why a lot of people like the David Tennant Doctor. In terms of the Doctor's reputation in the world, I don't know. I like the idea of him just being a man with a strong sense of morals and does what he thinks is right, rather than, say, how Matt Smith's Doctor is portrayed, which is just being this like being that's feared across all of time and space and history, and has legends written about him, and it's like I don't know. I like the idea of maybe the Daleks. The Daleks refer to him as the oncoming storm because that makes sense because that's a Time War thing. But the thought that like every civilization across all of time and space to think of the Doctor as being this like god,
well,
it gets a bit tiring after a while.
Well, I don't know, because, I mean, I can understand about it being a bit tiring, but I know we're going on a bit of a tangent here, but I think the amount of species and lives that the Doctor has affected, whether positively or negatively, I guess you would kind of think of him that way. I think...
Well, it makes sense, but that's why I think one of the things I like about, in the name of the Doctor, with the great intelligence jumping into his time streams, essentially, you've saved so many worlds, so many planets and species. I'm going to jump into your timeline and essentially undo every single one of your victories.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't paint him out to be like this mythological figure. It just basically paints him out as someone who's done so much good.
Yeah.
That, has gone on to have a massive effect on the universe for sure. But yeah, I think the characterization that Stephen Moffat went into, making him this kind of mythological figure, was maybe a bit too much for me.
I like it.
But yeah, I like that Christopher Eccleston is particularly, obviously this is his only series, but the Doctor in Series 1 is...
particularly human.
Yeah, and like I say, he's not even just in the way he's characterized, like he's not like, oh, I'm really weird all the time, but I just mean in the terms of like, he doesn't always have a plan. He isn't always able to save the day. Do you know what I mean? In the long game, Catherick needed to save him. Do you know what I mean? In World War III, Mickey needed to save him. But in Dalek, the Dalek destroys itself.
I know, but I think that's a bit... I think that's maybe why I don't stick with it so much, because think of how more impactful that this episode would have been if, he had been able to save himself and others in the other episodes. It's like the one time that he can't do anything, or he knows what he can do, but he refuses to do it, and there's only one man that can save him, and it's Rose's dad.
Because I was thinking about that, I was like, the Unquieted Dead, he doesn't save the day either, does he? Because technically it's Gwyneth that blows up the house.
So pretty much, Doesn't Rose save the day in Rose?
She does, yeah.
Yeah, so pretty much.
And then in the end of the world, it's just Cassandra doesn't have any moisturisers.
Isn't it Cheem?
Huh?
Is it Cheem?
Jabe.
Or Jabe.
What about Jabe?
Well, she goes across, doesn't she? Across the path and...
No, the Doctor goes across the path.
But she burns.
She holds the lever down to stop the fan blades.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like, the Doctor is obviously really smart and he often uses his intelligence and his charisma to inspire others to kind of achieve greatness, but he doesn't single-handedly save the day a lot in Series 1.
No, he doesn't.
It's like, even in the next story, with the Empty Child and the Doctor Dances, it's like, I say he doesn't like defeat the monster, because the whole thing with that episode is like the monster isn't actually a monster, but it's like he has to come to the realization and he makes it happen, even though he doesn't make it happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yeah, I kind of like that the Doctor has this very unceremonious death in this episode.
It's just very
Yeah,
quick,
the Reaper
fast.
goes down and just like noms him, flies around, it makes contact with the TARDIS and the floating key, and it obviously stops appearing, and the key just falls down dead to the floor, essentially.
And Rose is just like, I've killed him.
Yeah, Rose is like gutted, and she runs up and she says, the key is cold. Pete comes over to comfort her, but everyone there is pretty much lost hope. Now they're like, well, we're doomed. It immediately seems to like get dark outside. All the light in the church seems to just like go.
And this is when Pete goes to the window again.
He's back at the window and he's watching that car just looping outside. He goes up to Rose and he basically says, I know what I have to do now. The Doctor worked it out ages ago, but
He said, I love how he says, the Doctor cares about you so much.
yeah,
And he's like, he tried to find another way,
yeah.
but he knew.
He basically tried to find another way to avoid putting you through this again.
Yeah, which is just, again, so well written.
Yeah, but he
Everything
basically
like it.
says, I have to die. She says it's not fair. And he says, yeah, but look at all these extra hours we had.
Which is true, yeah.
Yeah. Something quite interesting here was when I was like researching beforehand was that in the original draft, Pete was looking out the window at the car doing the loops, and he was having a drink, I assume of like the communion wine or something.
Yeah.
And he was going to take this like big swig of wine before he goes to sacrifice himself.
Yeah.
But they I think they filmed it, but they cut it from the episode because they didn't want it to look like the alcohol had anything to do with his decision.
Yeah.
Even though in reality, I think that's one of those things that's just like, oh, here's my final drink type of
Yeah.
thing. But I think they wanted to avoid that. Begin with that shot where it's like a close-up of Rose on the left and you can see Pete on the right come out of the door and slowly walk towards her.
Yeah.
In that shot, you can still see he has that glass of wine. So it's like you see him kind of go up, take a sip, and then like put the glass down. But that
Yeah.
like close-up shot, I think they ended up cutting.
Yeah.
But that's just some interesting kind of behind-the-scenes thing. But yeah, they're having this conversation. Jackie shows up, and he essentially shows Rose to Jackie properly. And yeah, I think Jackie finally clicks with her.
Yeah.
And she says something like, "Oh my God, it's you!" And they hug. And all three of them do, don't they? They have this big kind of like family hug.
And then Pete explains.
He says something like, oh, you finally had your way. You're finally going to get rid of me.
Yeah.
She says like, oh, don't say that. But he says, no, it's okay. I have to die, but you have to live and raise our daughter. Yeah. So
And they hug and they kiss, and it's just like this whole little scene is just like the most heart melting.
I think because they're all hugging, the three of them, and this is the last time they're ever going to do it.
Yeah. And again, he turns to her and he says, I was never there for you, but now I will be.
Yeah,
And
so I
it's
was
like-
never there for you, but I can do this for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he grabs the vase and he runs out of the church.
And he says, thanks for saving me.
Yeah, he says, thanks for saving me. Oh, that's such like a heartbreaking moment.
I know.
Yeah, he runs towards the corner where he sees that car appear again.
And as he's about to hit him, he says, goodbye, love.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
literally
yeah,
that moment, I'm just like,
Yeah, he gets hit. The car doesn't appear this time. The driver stops. He doesn't do the hit and run. He stops and the driver kind of gets out of the car.
the Doctor appears behind Rose.
We see the Reapers in the air vanish. Yeah, everyone's back, including Stuart's father, and the
Yeah.
Doctor walks up to Rose, and he says, "Go to him." So she runs over to him, and she holds his hand, and he kind of like opens his eyes. He looks at her and he smiles, and he closes his eyes again, and he's gone.
And this next little bit, I think, is the reason why I like this episode so much. We then cut to how we started the episode with Jackie and 6-year-old Rose, and Jackie telling her the story about how he died alone.
Yeah. But the story's different this time.
And the story's changed, and she says, a girl sat there with him, and we never knew who she was, and we've never seen her again. But
she says the driver stopped and waited for the police.
And he was just a kid.
He was just a kid. It wasn't his fault. Pete just ran out. Yeah, there was a young girl who stayed with him as he died. Nobody knew who she was. And she just kind of disappeared afterwards. And that's it.
That's it. And it's just, it's just such a nice, it's obviously a heartbreaking ending, but it's such a nice ending to be like, after all this, something did change.
Yeah, it's that thing of she didn't get the happy ending she was looking for with her dad, being alive to raise her and everything, but
he didn't die.
But his
though.
memory, not only was she able to spend time with him and get to know him before he passed, but his memory and the way that even Jackie views him now is slightly different.
Yeah, and even, whereas before Jackie was, like you said, being quite blunt with how he died, even Jackie now has that warm feeling that he wasn't alone and that someone was with him.
And that's the interesting thing, because like the doctor said earlier, no one's going to have recollections of this, because when the Reapers disappear and everyone comes back, no one remembers what happened. I mean, Pete runs out and everyone, including Jackie, comes out of the church and goes, "What's going on?"
Yeah.
And no one seems to remember it. So it's not like she has the memories of this episode.
Yeah.
But you can tell subconsciously something's changed.
Yeah.
And that's what I quite like. But yeah, in terms of episode roundup, what do you think? Father's Day.
I think it's a very good episode. I think this is universally thought. I think
What
anyone
was the best in the series?
Well, just everybody you really speak to thinks this is a good episode.
Oh yeah, I've never met anyone who dislikes it.
No, I think it's really well written. I think it's such a good story. I think it shows more characters, like a character build of Rose and the Doctor, and how even though again she's betrayed his trust.
Yeah.
He forgives her because he cares for her, and it also shows the lengths he'll go to kind of make things better for her. Do you mean he literally would pretty much almost doom the world?
We get all the sides of the Doctor here. Trust me, this is very much Rose's episode, but I think this also does so much work for the Doctor.
It does.
We see all sides of him. We see the pity and the anger and the envy of having that normal life, and the caring nature and all of it. It's we see like every facet of this character that makes him who he is displayed in this episode.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you think that this was part of Rose's plan from the beginning? Do you think when she entered the TARDIS at the end of Rose, do you think she maybe had this idea on the back burner?
I don't think maybe as she ran in, I don't think she did, but I think over time...
I think it was kind of an idea that started brewing.
Maybe. I don't think she necessarily went back to change it, maybe.
Yeah.
But I think it was obviously a thought there of,
I mean, I guess it would be,
I guess as a child you would think, I wish... anything that bad happened, you go, I wish I'd been able to stop it. I wish that something would have been different. So, and she wanted something different. She wanted him not to be alone, which she got in the end. But I guess that want very quickly escalates. Yeah. When it's right there in front of you. Yeah. Yeah. What about you? No. What do you think?
I love it. I think it's great. I think, like I say, in my head, I have, like, when I, like, score these episodes, I think I gave Dalek, like, a higher score. But, like, on this rewatch, I think so far, this is probably my favourite one so far. I think I prefer this to Dalek. I'm curious to see how that's... I'm curious to see how that's going to hold up next week when we cover The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances, which I think is pretty largely regarded as the best story in season 1, or series 1. So I'm curious to see how that's gonna kind of fare. But yeah, I love this one. I love more personal stories and the ones that don't rely on the monsters as much.
Yeah, because they're really in it, aren't they?
Well, I like it when the monsters essentially force character drama. Because that's the thing. The thing with, like, say, the Daleks, as effective as they are, is they're essentially a threat in the sense that they will shoot you with their gun.
Yeah.
And that will kill you. And that's the threat. Where episodes like Heaven Sent, like Midnight, those are the kind of episodes that, very well regarded episodes. And it's because the monster of the week isn't necessarily the biggest threat in and of itself, but it's how it forces the characters to confront themselves and each other.
Yeah.
So, like, the whole thing with the Midnight Entity, it's not as if it's, like, got a big Gatling gun or anything. It just uses the Doctor's greatest strength, being his voice, against him.
Yeah.
Heaven Sent literally forces the Doctor to confront his grief. And these kind of monsters I find more interesting, and that's what I think here. Even though the Reapers obviously are a threat, but like you said, they're not really in the episode that much. They're purely there to force the characters into one room where they can have a conversation.
And it's one of those things, it's not like the Daleks are like, oh, they're evil and they just want to kill, but it's like these things are just, they're just giant bugs, and they're not going after anything in particular. They just, it's like you said, a bacteria in time, and they've come to cleanse it. That's it.
My thing with this, even as a kid, I remember thinking, as much as I like this episode, the thing that bothers me about it is that the Reapers never showed up again. And I made that, in my head, that was kind of a plot hole. It was like, think of how many paradoxes have happened. Why haven't the Reapers shown up again? And then I read something not long ago, which is like a fan theory on it, which is basically in my head, I thought the way this happened was once a paradox happens, the Reapers appear. Kind of like antibodies, do you know what I mean? And they go to sterilize the wound, because that's how it's kind of framed by the Doctor. But this fan theory was basically saying they don't appear every time there's a paradox. They're just creatures that exist anyway, and they happen to feed off of the energy caused by paradoxes.
Yeah,
so they were just nearby here, and they found it, but just because a paradox happens, there's no guarantee that they're nearby, which I don't think I like as much as them just being an entity that always appears when there's a paradox, but obviously based on the fact that that doesn't happen, and we never see them again, you kind of have to take that as like a headcanon, don't you?
Well, I guess you could argue, like the theory I said before, or my little theory of the first time they went back in time to the point where the Doctor and Rose were there to watch her dad.
Yeah.
Even though they were going to change something, nothing changed.
Yeah.
But when she asked to do it over again, I think personally she was thinking of saving her dad, and therefore they were kind of going back in time to save her dad, and that created a paradox. You know how I said before how the Doctor lands...
It's the bootstrap again, isn't it?
Lands randomly, and therefore there's no cause sending them back into time to change an event.
So you think as they might appear because of how strong of a paradox this is?
Yeah.
Especially because there was two of them there at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's because they wanted to go back to that time and change something, and that in itself would stop Rose wanting to go back in time and change something.
Yeah.
I think that in itself creates the paradox, and that's what they would feed off of.
Wibbly wobbly.
Wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey.
Indeed.
But yeah, I think that's how I kind of see it.
That makes sense.
Whereas like other things change, but it's not really a paradox, is it, so much?
Yeah.
If it just happens to change.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Working title for Father's Day was Wounded Time. It's a bit on the nose.
Yeah, and I just like Father's Day.
Yeah. It's quite nice.
Any others?
That's the only working title I've got. But I do know that both Christopher Eccleston and Billy Piper have both said that this is their favourite episode in Series 1.
That's nice.
Which
Fair enough.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I know I mentioned this in one of the previous episodes. I don't think it was actually in the long game one last week. I think it was one of the early ones. But Simon Pegg was nearly cast as Pete.
I remember you telling me this before.
He was since cast as the editor, and the role of Pete went to Sean Dingwall. I think Sean Dingwall is great. I think it's because when I think of Pete, I think of him later in Series 2, like the Parallel Earth version.
Yeah.
And I forget that technically Pete, as in Rose's dad, is only in this episode. Because I always think of like those other ones. But I think he plays the character very well.
Yeah.
A lot of good face acting, for lack of better words. Do you know what I mean? Saying a lot with just an emotion, just like a facial expression. I think he's really good. And I buy him as this kind of hopeless Del boy, with a heart of gold, but also kind of useless figure. but also just loves his family.
Yeah. I think, don't get me wrong, I'd be very curious to see Simon Pegg in that role. I think he'd do a good job, but I don't know whether we've mentioned it on here before, but I very much struggle separating actors from roles.
I don't think you've mentioned that specifically on the pod, but I do think last week you did mention that you
Kind of drawn
you couldn't
from it.
unsee Simon Pegg.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I have this issue in life. I find it quite difficult. I prefer more animation movies because I can escape into those a bit more.
Yeah,
So
so,
I can
when you watch
imagine-
like Pixar movies, even though the characters are often voiced by really famous celebrities with very identifiable voices,
is-
you never seem to pick up on
I never
it.
pick up on it because I'm very visual. So
Yeah.
for me, I can
Where if you watch like a live action movie with like Leonardo DiCaprio or
Instantly,
Brad
I'm
Pitt,
like, that's
you're
Leonardo
like, yeah, that's
DiCaprio,
Leonardo DiCaprio. You struggle to buy into the character.
yeah. So unless I don't know the person playing the role,
Yeah.
I can kind of think, okay, well, that is Pete Tyler.
Yeah.
So, if I were to see him in anything else, it would be, that's Pete Tyler.
Yeah.
So I
So I guess it
like
makes more sense for that. It's better for you that Simon Pegg's like a one-off villain of the week
Yeah.
rather than such a pivotal character.
because I think it would have had less of an effect, even if he'd done just as good a job, or if not better.
My
I think it
question
would
for
have
you
been
then, with
bit
that
less.
mindset, do you struggle with John Hurt as the War Doctor?
That's a good question. I know this is going to be bad. So when I saw Day of the Doctor, because I watched it live,
Yeah.
I had barely seen any John Hurt things.
Okay.
Like I don't actually
I mean, you'd have been, 14?
something like that.
Yeah.
I'd never seen Alien at the time, and I can't name any other things. I'm very sorry, John Hurt.
You saw Harry Potter?
Oh yeah, I've seen. Well, actually, no, I hadn't seen Harry Potter at that point either. The only thing that I knew him in was Merlin.
Oh, yeah, isn't he the dragon?
He's the dragon, but
Yeah.
then it's not him visually. It's
That's true.
just his voice.
Yeah.
So for me, even though I was like, oh, that's
So when
John
you think
Hurt.
of John Hurt, do you picture the War Doctor?
Yeah,
That's interesting.
in many cases terrible, but
Oh, that's
like I
fascinating.
said, when I
then.
hear his voice, I think Merlin, but when I see his face, I think Doctor Who. Which again, I can imagine so many people out there who are film fans or John Hurt fans are like, "What is wrong with you?"
Well, no, because again, I think it's a generation thing. I think because it's like if you're not a big cinema buff, then you're obviously because he's not one of those actors that's in like all the MCU stuff or whatever. Harry Potter is arguably the most mainstream kind of thing he's in. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, he was in like the Elephant Man, although he
Yeah.
was underneath a lot of like prosthetics and makeup
yeah.
and stuff. But like, Harry Potter's probably like the most mainstream thing. Like if you said to most people John Hurt and they go who, you'd say Ollivander from Harry Potter. They go, oh yeah, I know who you mean.
Yeah, but even then, like he looks very different to what he's in a lot of makeup there.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you can tell who he is. He's not like unrecognizable. He's just obviously he looks older
yeah.
because he's got like old man makeup on. But
But again, as I generally gravitate towards more animation, I probably watch many things, animated things with him in it, voicing stuff, but visually I haven't
when you
seen
were
it much.
watching that DuckTales reboot and you
Yeah.
had Scrooge McDuck, were you picturing David Tennant when he was talking?
No, I wasn't.
You just bought into it.
This is the thing. Now and again, he would say stuff, and I'd be like, "There's David Tennant."
Yeah.
But I don't know why. Sound wise, I just completely like Connor often does this. He'll bring up a movie and you'll be like, "Oh, this character plays that character," and it'll blow my mind.
Yeah.
Because I just don't. I don't
Yeah.
associate them. I wonder if the audio dramas would be interesting a bit more there. Whether
The audio dramas are really interesting because obviously not having as much budget, they obviously don't have like a million extras and stuff. So they often have a select group of like voice actors who will just kind of do
multiple parts.
other roles, do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like non-main characters. What I would be curious for you to listen to would be audio dramas where they don't have the doctor, the actor playing the doctor, and they have sound-alikes in. I'd be curious to like say, have you listened to Jacob Dudman doing his Matt Smith impression to see if you would notice?
I guess it's one of those things because there's nothing visually. I probably would.
Yeah,
Because
well,
I'm more
it's weird
focused
because
on
like Jacob
sound.
Dudman's quite famous in the community because he's quite a good impressionist, and his Matt Smith is very good. His Peter Capaldi is not.
Aw.
So I know he's done quite a few 12th Doctor dramas, and yeah, that's not great. But he does a good Matt Smith. He does a pretty good Eccleston, and he does an okay David Tennant. But his
So he's not so great on the Scottish ones then.
apparently, yeah.
Has he done Shooty yet?
Oh God, I hope not. Yeah, but back to Father's Day. The only other thing I have is filming locations.
Yeah.
Obviously, the church itself is St. Paul's Church in Grangetown. And you know the registry office that Peace and Jackie get married in the beginning.
Yeah.
That's actually the boardroom of the HTV Wales building in Culverhouse Cross. Bit random.
HTV Vale cover.
I don't think that exists anymore.
I was going to say I don't think that exists anymore. I briefly remember it, but I think we would. Oh,
Yeah.
we obviously would have been very.
But it
young.
was filmed very close to home.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, do you have anything else regarding Father's Day?
No, nothing
No.
else.
Cool. Well, thank you all very much for listening.
Sorry for the tangent.
People love a tangent. Why else would you listen to a podcast if you don't want a tangent?
I know, but at least you want a related tangent. That was a bit off-piste. Sorry.
I mean, it's kind of. I'm pretty sure it's in our channel description on YouTube.
There's a warning.
It's like prepare to for us to go off topic.
Yeah.
Don't expect us to stay on topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you like that kind of thing,
then do we have a show for you?
yeah, come back next time.
Yeah, like I say, don't forget to leave a like down below if you did enjoy. You can subscribe to the channel to keep posted with all our latest stuff. You can follow us over on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts if you consume your podcasts over there. So you don't have to just look at a static screen on YouTube. If you are a podcasty person, then maybe that's the better way to consume this for you. But yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Until then, I guess stay safe.
Well, two things. See you next time for
The Blitz.
oh no. Oh no. Yeah, the oh god, I'm terrible with names. Help me.
Do you want the episode name?
Yes.
The Empty Child.
The Empty Child and the
Yeah.
Doctor Dances.
Yes.
Yeah, the two-parter. We'll cover that next time.
Yeah.
But yeah, until then, don't create any paradoxes.
Stay
If you-
safe.
if you
Stay away
can.
from Reapers.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye bye.